You think you know someone. You watch them every single morning. You see their smile. You hear their laugh. You feel like they're sitting right there in your living room, talking directly to you. Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American television. Confident, warm, unshakable. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Behind that camera, behind that perfectly lit studio, behind that smile that millions of people wake up to every day, there was a story being kept quiet. A story that Savannah herself never fully told. And the person who finally decided to speak, her sister, not a former colleague, not an anonymous source, her own flesh and blood, the person who grew up in the same house, shared the same dinner table, and watched Savannah become who she is today. And what she said, nobody expected it. Not the fans, not the media, not even the people closest to Savannah. Because it wasn't just a story about fame or television or morning shows. It was a story about survival, about sacrifice, about a family that held itself together through things most people will never have to face. There were moments, dark moments, moments that never made the headlines, moments that changed everything. So before you assume you already know who Savannah Guthrie really is, sit down, because the version of her you're about to meet is nothing like the one you see on your screen every morning. This is the truth, raw, real, and long overdue. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the beginning you've heard before, not the polished version, not the highlight reel, the real beginning. Savannah Guthrie was born in Melbourne, Australia. In 1971, her family moved to the United States when she was still young, first to Arizona, then eventually settling into a life that looked ordinary from the outside. And for a while, it was. But underneath that ordinary surface, things were shifting. Things were being quietly carried. And the person who watched all of it up close, who saw every crack, every struggle, every quiet moment of doubt, was her sister, Annie Guthrie. Now, Annie isn't a household name. She didn't end up in front of a camera. She didn't become the face of a network. She built a quieter life, a private life. But quiet doesn't mean uninformed, and private doesn't mean silent forever. When Annie finally spoke up, she didn't do it for attention. She didn't do it to create drama. She did it because she said, and these are words that stayed with people, she said, "There's a version of my sister the world has never seen, and I think they deserve to." That hit differently, because it wasn't a PR statement. It wasn't crafted by some media team. It was a sister, speaking plainly, with love, and with something that felt like urgency. What was she trying to say? What had she been holding onto? People started paying attention in a way they hadn't before. Because when someone who has nothing to gain steps forward and says the story isn't complete, you listen. Savannah's public story is impressive on its own terms. Law degree from Georgetown. Years in courtrooms before she ever touched a television set. Then the pivot to journalism, the climb through networks, the seat at the Today Show, the interviews with presidents and celebrities and world leaders. It looks like a straight line when you read it in a bio, but straight lines don't exist in real life, and Annie knew that better than anyone. What she revealed pulled back a curtain that had been carefully, quietly kept closed for years. Get comfortable, because this story is about to go places you didn't see coming. Let's talk about where Savannah Guthrie actually came from, because the childhood is where everything starts, and her childhood was not without its weight. Growing up, the Guthrie family experienced something that reshapes a family permanently. When Savannah was still young, her father passed away, suddenly, unexpectedly, and everything changed. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up one day and rearranges every single thing about how a family operates. How they talk to each other, how they love each other, how they survive. Savannah's mother stepped up in a way that people who know the family describe as nothing short of extraordinary. She held things together. She kept the family moving forward. But that kind of strength, it has a cost. And kids in households like that learn to carry weight early. They learn to be responsible. They learn not to fall apart. They learn that falling apart is a luxury they can't afford. Savannah learned that. She internalized it. She built something around herself, a kind of armor that looked, from the outside, like ambition, like drive, like focus. But Annie saw it differently. Annie saw a young girl who was figuring out how to hold her grief in one hand and her future in the other, and she didn't always know which one to put down first. There's a version of Savannah that the world sees, the composed anchor, the sharp interviewer, the woman who can sit across from the most powerful people in the world and not blink. That version was built carefully, painfully, over years. And according to Annie, the building process wasn't pretty. There were moments of serious self-doubt, moments where Savannah questioned everything, moments that happened behind closed doors that never made it into any interview, any profile, any morning segment. And that's exactly where Annie's story begins to get complicated. Because what she revealed wasn't just about hardship. It was about something much more specific. Something that happened when Savannah was right on the edge of becoming who she is today. Here's a moment nobody talks about. Before Savannah Guthrie was a television personality, before the Today Show, before the big interviews, she was a lawyer, a real one, with real cases, real clients, real pressure. She worked hard to get that law degree from Georgetown. She passed the bar, she put in the hours, and she was good at it. But something was missing, and she knew it, deep down. In that way you know things that you're not ready to say out loud yet. She had built a respectable career, a stable career, the kind of career that makes parents proud, the kind of career you don't walk away from without people thinking you've lost your mind. And then she started walking away from it, slowly at first, quietly, testing the waters of something that felt risky and uncertain and completely unlike the path she'd been on, journalism. Now here's what Annie said about this period, and this is the part that genuinely surprised people. She said Savannah almost didn't do it, not because she didn't want to, but because she was terrified. The kind of terrified that keeps you up at night, the kind that makes you question whether the safer road is actually the smarter one. She had something to lose, real credentials, a real identity. The law wasn't just a job, it was how she defined herself after years of working toward it. To let go of that and step into something completely unknown, that's not ambition, that's courage. And courage, Annie reminded everyone, always feels like fear first. There was a specific conversation between the two sisters during this time. A late-night phone call. Savannah was second-guessing herself hard. She was talking about playing it safe, about staying where she was, about being realistic. And Annie told her something simple, something that sounds small but clearly wasn't. But before we get to exactly what was said, you need to understand what was truly at stake when that conversation happened, because the timing of it, that changes everything. By the time Savannah was standing at that crossroads between law and journalism, she wasn't just making a career decision, she was making a life decision. And life decisions come with life consequences. She was in her late 20s, not a kid anymore, old enough to know that starting over isn't romantic, it's exhausting, it's expensive, it's lonely in a specific way that only people who've done it understand. She had student loans from Georgetown. She had a professional reputation. She had built something, and she was considering dismantling it. For what? For a chance? For a feeling? The people around her, not Annie, but others, some of them told her to be careful. Some of them, quietly, told her she was making a mistake. That's the part that doesn't make the highlight reel. Nobody talks about the people who almost talked Savannah Guthrie out of becoming Savannah Guthrie. But Annie did. Because Annie was there. She heard those conversations. She watched her sister absorb that doubt from people she trusted and start to fold it into her own thinking. And then something happened that shifted the entire situation. Not a breakthrough, not a big opportunity, something smaller than that. A moment of clarity that came from a completely unexpected direction, not from a mentor, not from a professional contact, not from some inspiring event. It came from loss, from grief, revisited. Something reminded Savannah of her father during that period. Annie hasn't said exactly what it was. She's kept that specific piece private, and honestly, that privacy deserves to be respected. But she said that whatever it was, it reminded Savannah that life is not a dress rehearsal, that waiting for the perfect moment is just another way of being afraid. And something unlocked. But what happened right after that? In the weeks and months that followed, that's where things get unexpectedly intense. Savannah made the leap. She stepped away from law and into journalism, and she was not an overnight success. Let's be very clear about that, because the narrative that gets told about people like Savannah Guthrie, successful, polished, at the top of their field, it tends to skip the middle part. The middle part is where most people give up. She started at local news, small markets, the kind of work where you're doing everything, writing, reporting, sometimes holding the camera yourself. The kind of work where the pay is low and the hours are brutal and you go home wondering if you made the right call. Annie watched this period closely, and she says it was harder than Savannah ever let on publicly. There were days Savannah was exhausted in a way that went beyond tired. There were moments of professional rejection that hit harder than expected. There were times she compared her progress to former law colleagues who were advancing steadily and comfortably, and she felt the sting of that comparison. Self-doubt doesn't take a vacation just because you made a brave decision. But here's what Annie also noticed during this period. Something was different about how Savannah moved through those hard moments now, compared to before, compared to the version of her sister who used to let fear do the steering. She was still scared, but she kept going anyway. That's a different kind of person than who she'd been even 2 years earlier. And the people at the small stations where she worked, they noticed something too. Something about how she carried herself on camera, how she talked to people, how she made interviews feel like conversations instead of interrogations. It was natural, and natural is the hardest thing to teach. One door eventually opened, then another. Then the calls started coming from bigger markets, and then bigger networks. But just when it looked like everything was finally coming together, something happened at home, something that tested everything all over again. And Annie's voice changed when she talked about this part. You could hear it shift. Savannah's personal life during her rise was complicated. Quietly, privately, significantly complicated. She went through a divorce. Her first marriage ended. And that's a sentence that's easy to say and hard to live through. She was in the middle of her career climb. She was finally gaining traction. Things professionally were starting to look like what she'd sacrificed for. And then the floor of her personal life gave way. Annie said that this period broke her sister open in a way that nothing else had. The grief she'd learned to carry since childhood, the professional struggle, the self-doubt, all of it got louder during this time. And Savannah did something that Annie deeply respects. She didn't hide it, not from her family, not from herself. She sat in it. She processed it. She got honest about what she wanted her life to actually look like. Not just her career, but her life, her relationships, her future. That honesty eventually led her somewhere beautiful. She met Michael Feldman. She found love in a way that felt steady and real and earned. They built something genuine together. They have children together now, 2 kids that Savannah has spoken about with the kind of joy that doesn't come from people performing happiness. It comes from people who know what it feels like to not have it. But Annie's revelation wasn't just about the love story. It was about what Savannah carried through all of it without ever putting it down publicly. She had a health scare, a significant one that reoriented her thinking about time and priority in ways she's only hinted at in public. And Annie said, with total clarity, that during that period, Savannah's faith became something different than what it had been before. Not a background detail, not a quiet thing she kept to herself. Something active, something load-bearing. Savannah Guthrie announced publicly that she was facing a serious eye condition, a detached retina, then complications, then the very real possibility of losing significant vision. For a woman whose career is built entirely on being present, on reading, on seeing, the irony of that was not lost on anyone. But what Annie revealed is what happened during the private hours of that health crisis, the hours nobody filmed. Savannah prayed, not quietly in the background, out loud, with her family, with her children, in a way that made everyone around her feel something shift. Annie said it was the most grounded she had ever seen her sister. In the middle of something terrifying, Savannah was somehow the calmest person in the room. That doesn't happen by accident. That's years of inner work paying off exactly when it needs to. And when Savannah returned to the Today Show after her recovery, that smile you saw, that wasn't performance. That was someone who understood exactly how close things had come to being different. And that understanding changed how she showed up. not just on camera, but at home, with her children, in every quiet moment that the world never gets to see. Here's what Annie wanted people to understand about Savannah and motherhood. Because there's a version of Savannah people see on TV, the professional, the anchor, the journalist, and then there's the version at home. Annie says those two versions are not as different as you might expect. And that's actually the surprising part. Savannah doesn't transform when the cameras turn off. She doesn't become someone else. She's the same person, warm, direct, a little intense, deeply loving. Her daughter Vale and her son Charlie are growing up with a mother who has been through enough to know what actually matters. And what actually matters, according to Savannah: time, presence, showing up in the small moments. She wakes up before sunrise for work almost every day. And she's talked about the guilt that comes with that schedule, the missed bedtimes, the rushing. But Annie said something that reframes all of it. She said Savannah's kids are watching a woman who loves what she does and still chooses them first, when it counts. That's not a contradiction. That's a lesson. And people who know the family say that lesson is being received loud and clear by two kids who are growing up understanding that strength and softness are not opposites. They're the same thing wearing different faces. People have asked for years about the dynamic between Savannah and her Today Show co-hosts, about whether what you see on screen is real. Annie addressed this directly. She said Savannah is not a performer when it comes to her relationships. What you see is what exists. The warmth with Hoda Kotb is genuine. The laughter is real. The moments of visible emotion during difficult news stories, those aren't crafted for ratings. Annie has watched her sister prepare for interviews. She's seen the research, the late nights going through material, the seriousness with which Savannah approaches every single conversation she has on that show. She doesn't coast. She has never coasted. And Annie says that's the thing about Savannah that doesn't translate through a screen as clearly as it should. The level of work that goes into looking effortless is staggering. Most people see the ease. They don't see the hours that created it. And that gap between what's visible and what's real is exactly what Annie wanted to close. When she decided to speak up, there was one more thing Annie revealed. And this one was personal in a different way. She talked about what it's like to be Savannah Guthrie's sister. Not famous, not in the spotlight, living a private life while your sibling is one of the most recognized women in America. And she was refreshingly honest about it. She said there are moments of pride so intense it almost overwhelms her. Watching Savannah interview a sitting president, watching her hold her composure through breaking news, watching her make difficult conversations feel human. But she also said there are moments of protectiveness, of wanting to shield her sister from the commentary, the criticism, the opinion pieces that come with that level of visibility. Because she knows Savannah reads it. She feels it. She is not immune. Fame does not make you bulletproof. It just gives more people access to aim at you. And Annie said the version of Savannah that has to absorb that, quietly, privately, without complaint, is someone the public has never really met. Until now. So what's the truth that no one expected? Here it is, plain and simple. Savannah Guthrie is not a success story. Not in the way that phrase usually gets used. She's a survival story. She's a woman who lost her father too young and learned to carry grief, who almost talked herself out of her own potential, who went through professional struggle and personal heartbreak and a health scare that could have fundamentally altered her future. And she came out the other side, not unscathed, but intact, not perfect, but present. Annie's silence wasn't protection. It was waiting until the right moment to say what she believed people needed to hear, which is this: the people you admire most are not superhuman. They are deeply, completely human. They just decided, in their hardest moments, to keep going anyway. Savannah kept going, and Annie wanted you to know that. Because maybe, in whatever you're carrying right now, that's exactly what you needed to hear today. If this story moved you, hit that like button, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that real strength looks nothing like what we expect. And drop a comment below. What part of Savannah's story hit you the hardest? We read every single one.